From the fabricated nobility of Scandinavia, we now journey 3,000 years into the past, to the Valley of the Kings, where DNA sealed in mummified flesh revealed what the pharaohs tried to hide for eternity. This is document number 8, the Egyptian Royal Mummy DNA files. The Valley of the Kings has yielded its dead reluctantly, each tomb revealing secrets that the priests of ancient Thebes labored to conceal for eternity. For 3,000 years, the mummified remains of Egypt's pharaohs lay in darkness, their preserved flesh and bones carrying genetic information that would eventually rewrite the history of the world's most celebrated royal dynasty. When modern science developed the tools to read that genetic information, the results were so explosive that they were suppressed for decades, hidden behind layers of bureaucratic obstruction and nationalistic sensitivity. The Egyptian Royal Mummy DNA files documented what the pharaohs themselves had concealed through elaborate rituals of legitimacy: that the bloodline of the gods was tangled with incest, disputed succession, and ancestry that contradicted the official mythology of divine kingship. The story of these suppressed files begins in 1922, when Howard Carter unsealed the tomb of Tutankhamun and revealed the most complete royal burial ever discovered in Egypt. The golden death mask that stared out from the sarcophagus became an icon of ancient civilization, and the young pharaoh whose face it preserved became the most famous king in human history. Yet from the very beginning, questions surrounded Tutankhamun's identity. Who were his parents? How had he come to the throne as a child? Why had he died so young, and why had his tomb been prepared with such evident haste? The answers to these questions lay in the mummy itself, in the genetic material that could establish family relationships with scientific certainty. The technology to extract and analyze ancient DNA did not exist in Carter's time, and for decades, the mummy of Tutankhamun was studied only through physical examination and X-ray imaging. These investigations revealed a young man who had died around age 19, whose body showed signs of various ailments, including a badly broken leg, that may have contributed to his death. But they could not answer the fundamental genealogical questions that had puzzled Egyptologists since the tomb's discovery. For that, researchers would need to extract DNA from the mummy's tissues and compare it with other royal remains. The first serious attempts at DNA extraction began in the 1980s, as the technology of genetic analysis advanced rapidly in laboratories around the world. Egyptian authorities, who controlled access to the royal mummies housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, were initially cooperative, granting permission for small tissue samples to be removed and analyzed. The early results were inconclusive, hampered by contamination and degradation of the ancient genetic material. But as techniques improved through the 1990s, clearer results began to emerge, results that Egyptian authorities found increasingly uncomfortable. The problem was that the DNA evidence contradicted the official genealogy that Egypt had promoted for decades. Tutankhamun had been presented to the world as the son of Akhenaten, the revolutionary pharaoh who had attempted to replace Egypt's traditional religion with worship of a single sun god. Akhenaten's religious revolution had ultimately failed, and his successors had worked to erase his memory from Egyptian history. Tutankhamun's brief reign represented a return to orthodoxy, a restoration of the old gods that the Egyptian state preferred to emphasize. The genetic evidence, however, suggested a more complicated picture, one that implicated the royal family in incestuous relationships that even ancient standards found troubling. The DNA showed that Tutankhamun's parents were full siblings, brother and sister, who had produced a child with the genetic consequences of close inbreeding. The evidence of this incest was written in the pharaoh's genome, in the high levels of homozygosity that could only result from the mating of close relatives. Tutankhamun himself showed signs of the genetic disorders that accompany inbreeding, including a club foot, a cleft palate, and bone disease that may have contributed to his early death. The golden mask had concealed a body ravaged by the consequences of royal endogamy, a practice that Egyptian sources acknowledged but rarely emphasized. The identity of these sibling parents became the subject of intense controversy. One parent was almost certainly Akhenaten, whose mummy had been tentatively identified among the remains in tomb KV55. The other parent was presumed to be one of Akhenaten's sisters, but which one? The leading candidates included Sitamon, the eldest daughter of Amenhotep III, and an unnamed princess whose mummy had been found in the same tomb complex. DNA analysis could potentially resolve the question, but the results were never fully published, and the files that documented the analysis were restricted by Egyptian authorities. The suppression began in the early 2000s, when a new generation of Egyptian officials took control of antiquities policy. These officials were acutely sensitive to the representation of Egyptian heritage on the world stage, concerned that Western researchers were exploiting Egyptian mummies for scientific purposes without adequate consultation or benefit sharing. They were also aware that the DNA evidence being accumulated painted an unflattering picture of the pharaohs, emphasizing incest and genetic disease rather than the grandeur and divinity that tourism promotion preferred. Access to the royal mummies became increasingly restricted, and researchers who had previously enjoyed cooperation found their requests denied or indefinitely delayed. The files that documented the DNA analysis accumulated in laboratories and museums around the world, their contents known to small circles of specialists, but never systematically published. When Zahi Hawass, the flamboyant Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, announced a major DNA study of the royal mummies in 2007, expectations ran high that the suppressed evidence would finally be revealed. Instead, the study's results, published in 2010, were carefully curated to emphasize certain findings while downplaying others. The incestuous parentage of Tutankhamun was acknowledged, but the full genealogical picture, including evidence of incest extending through multiple generations, was presented in fragmentary form that left crucial questions unanswered. The unpublished portions of the DNA files told a more comprehensive story. Analysis of multiple royal mummies from the 18th dynasty revealed patterns of inbreeding that extended far beyond Tutankhamun's immediate family. Amenhotep III, often considered Egypt's greatest pharaoh, had married his own daughter Sitamon, producing children who carried the genetic markers of this union. His predecessor Thutmose IV showed evidence of mixed ancestry that contradicted the traditional genealogy connecting him to his supposed father, Amenhotep II. The famous Queen Nefertiti, whose identity and fate had been subjects of endless speculation, was represented in the DNA data by a mummy whose genetic profile raised as many questions as it answered. The suppression of these findings reflected multiple overlapping concerns. Egyptian officials worried about the impact on national prestige, fearing that emphasis on royal incest would reinforce Orientalist stereotypes about Eastern decadence and barbarism. They were concerned about tourism, which depended on romanticized images of the pharaohs that the DNA evidence complicated. They faced pressure from religious authorities who objected to the disturbance of ancient graves for scientific purposes, regardless of what the research might reveal. And they confronted legal and ethical questions about the ownership of genetic information extracted from remains that were, in some sense, the ancestors of all Egyptians. International researchers who had participated in the DNA studies found themselves caught between scientific norms of transparency and the political realities of working in Egypt. Some published what they could through academic channels, contributing fragments of information to scholarly journals read mainly by specialists. Others held their findings indefinitely, hoping that political conditions would eventually allow full disclosure. A few leaked information to journalists and popular authors, contributing to a shadow literature of claims and counterclaims about what the DNA really showed. The result was confusion rather than clarity, with multiple competing narratives about the Pharaohs' genealogy circulating without definitive resolution. The files also documented discoveries that threatened established narratives about Egyptian racial identity. DNA analysis of the royal mummies revealed genetic profiles that were complex and surprising, showing connections to populations from across the ancient Mediterranean and beyond. Some mummies showed significant sub-Saharan African ancestry, while others showed connections to populations from the Levant and Anatolia. The Pharaohs were not a racially homogeneous group, but a dynasty that had absorbed influences from the diverse peoples who had inhabited the Nile Valley and its surrounding regions over millennia. This finding was politically explosive in multiple directions. Afrocentric scholars who had long argued that ancient Egypt was a black African civilization saw the evidence of sub-Saharan ancestry as vindication of their claims. Egyptian nationalists who preferred to emphasize the unique character of pharaonic civilization resisted any characterization that linked them too closely to either African or Middle Eastern populations. Western researchers who had traditionally depicted the ancient Egyptians as essentially Mediterranean or Near Eastern found their assumptions challenged by genetic evidence that complicated all simple racial categories. The suppression of the DNA files served to prevent any of these groups from claiming definitive victory, maintaining an ambiguity that allowed multiple narratives to coexist without confrontation. Egyptian authorities could continue to present the pharaohs as uniquely Egyptian, neither African nor Asian, but something sui generis. Afrocentrists could point to the acknowledged presence of sub-Saharan ancestry as proof of their broader claims. Western scholars could maintain their traditional interpretations while acknowledging complexity that did not fundamentally challenge their frameworks. The DNA evidence, if fully published, would have forced a reckoning that all parties preferred to avoid. The question of Tutankhamun's death became another focus of suppressed analysis. The DNA files included evidence bearing on various theories about how the young pharaoh had met his end. The broken leg documented in X-rays had long been cited as a possible cause of death, perhaps through infection or blood loss. DNA analysis revealed the presence of malaria parasites in Tutankhamun's tissue, suggesting that the disease might have weakened him fatally. Other evidence pointed to genetic conditions that could have caused sudden death, including disorders affecting the heart and circulatory system. What the files did not support was the murder theory that had captivated popular imagination since the tomb's discovery. Tutankhamun had not been killed by a blow to the head, as some earlier investigators had speculated, nor was there evidence of poisoning or other foul play. He had died of natural causes exacerbated by the genetic burden he carried from his incestuous conception. This finding was less dramatic than murder by ambitious courtiers, less suitable for the documentaries and bestsellers that shaped public understanding of ancient Egypt. The full DNA analysis that supported this conclusion remained in restricted files, while simplified versions that preserved some mystery continued to circulate. The files also documented the tangled question of succession that had troubled the end of the 18th dynasty. Tutankhamun had died without surviving children, though the mummified remains of 2 premature infants found in his tomb showed genetic profiles consistent with his paternity. His wife, Ankhesenamun, who was also his half-sister, had apparently been unable to produce a viable heir, perhaps because the genetic burden of inbreeding was finally too great to overcome. The dynasty had passed through various short-lived successors before eventually transitioning to the 19th dynasty under Ramesses I. A transition whose genealogical details remained murky, even with DNA evidence. The suppression of the Egyptian royal mummy DNA files created a peculiar situation in which the scientific community possessed information it could not fully share. Researchers who had participated in the studies knew things about the pharaohs that the public did not, information that shaped their understanding of Egyptian history, but that they could not incorporate into published scholarship. Some experienced this as an ethical burden, a violation of the transparency norms that supposedly governed scientific research. Others accepted it as a reasonable accommodation to the sensitivities of the host country that had granted access to the mummies in the first place. The situation has evolved somewhat in recent years, as changes in Egyptian political leadership have shifted antiquities policies. Some previously suppressed findings have been quietly released through academic channels, incorporated into specialist literature without fanfare. New DNA studies have been announced, though their scope and transparency remain uncertain. The fundamental tensions between scientific transparency and national sensitivity continue to shape what can be known and published about the genetic heritage of the pharaohs. The Egyptian royal mummy DNA files represent a uniquely modern form of historical suppression, one that involves cutting-edge technology rather than ancient manuscripts. The documents being suppressed are not papyri or hieroglyphic inscriptions, but digital files containing genetic sequences and statistical analyses. The motivations for suppression mix ancient concerns about royal dignity with contemporary anxieties about race, identity, and the ownership of genetic heritage. The pharaohs who built the pyramids to ensure their immortality could never have imagined that their genetic information would become a contested resource in 21st century debates about science, politics, and the past. What the files ultimately reveal is that the pharaohs were human, subject to the same biological constraints that govern all human reproduction. Their claims to divine status and eternal life did not protect them from the consequences of inbreeding, from genetic disease, or from the mundane causes of death that claim ordinary mortals. The golden masks and elaborate tombs concealed bodies that bore the marks of their flawed conception, and the DNA locked in those bodies told stories that contradicted the mythology carved on temple walls. The suppression of this evidence perpetuates myths that science has already debunked, maintaining an image of pharaonic grandeur that the genetic reality cannot support. The Valley of the Kings continues to yield secrets, as new technologies enable analysis of remains that previous generations could only examine visually. Each advance in genetic science creates new possibilities for understanding the pharaohs and new pressures for disclosure of findings that have been suppressed. The Egyptian royal mummy DNA files will eventually be fully published, their contents incorporated into the historical record that they will necessarily transform. When that day comes, the pharaohs will finally be seen clearly, not as the gods they claim to be, but as the humans their DNA proves they were, remarkable humans who built an extraordinary civilization, but humans nonetheless, with all the complications that humanity entails.